Yat e she Megan Joyan shed na kadenen ishlen troba hebashin sanabetnia de shache kachini de chanale auto na kaibato de nasha. My name is Megan, and I'm originally from the Mexican Springs area, which is just north of Gallup, but I definitely do have very deep roots here in Albuquerque. And so I think first and foremost, my family is really what, makes me who I am today. And I definitely value the strong family unit I come from. And then also I think with my organizing experience here in Albuquerque, that definitely contributed to, social justice work with an anti-racism lens. And so being able to be connected with UNM in so many different ways, since a kid, really. And so going through my undergrad and then being able to work at the UNM Community Engagement Center here and doing service learning opportunities for students, getting connected with community-based organizations here in Albuquerque, and just seeing all the different ways community leaders and organizers have been doing so much amazing work in terms of climate change, in terms of immigration rights, in terms of tribal sovereignty, and really inviting students to be able to take part of that has been really transformational. And so now going into the MCRP program and wanting to develop these research skills and have a community engaged focus with those community-based principles, along with the Indigenous kind of, framework, has been, what has wanted to shape me as a researcher and the kind of work that I want to be able to continue to engage in.
Could you talk a little bit more about your work in the Community Engagement Center?
Yeah, so after my undergrad, I got introduced to an AmeriCorps program, so Public Allies, New Mexico. And so it was housed here at the UNM Community Engagement Center, and so they have different programs. They have the Public Allies, they have the UNM Service Corps, and then they have an anti-racism youth leadership institute. And so that one, they would engage with middle schoolers to high school students, but the Public Allies program really exposed me to a lot of different community-based organizations within Albuquerque, in terms of like different farming programs, different kind of research projects, and so after going through the Public Allies program, I got hired on as staff at the CEC. And so being able to, have that direct involvement with the programming and then getting more exposed to, the administrative side of it, as well as the professional development kind of workshops we were doing with students and also community members too. And so definitely, it's a small team, so those women have been so committed to that work for so many different years. So they definitely taught me, sort of that foundational kind of social justice and equity kind of work.
What first pulled you toward community and regional planning? And was there a moment where it clicked for you?
Yeah, so prior to the MCRP, I was working at the UNM Community Engagement Center here. And so definitely a big shout out to that team of women. And so a lot of the community leaders that I got to meet and work with, they came out of the MCRP program themselves. And so they definitely encouraged me to look into it. Because I did take some time between my undergrad and a graduate program just because I didn't want to just go into school just to do it. I really wanted to enjoy my time and really invest in a program that I was, wanting to be able to get like research skills out of and be able to connect at a very local level. And so yeah, being able to meet all these different people, these MCRP alumni, and seeing the work that they were doing. And it wasn't necessarily like urban planning specific, but they were, they were planners and they were working in these spaces of like public health and, economic development as well. And, food justice work as well. And so, yeah, just being able to learn from them and yeah, get connected to the MCRP application process.
How has your identity as a Dine woman influenced the way you step into planning spaces and decision making spaces?
Hmm. I think it definitely goes back to my family and sort of those teachings that I was brought up with, and just that those lessons of, okay, the importance of attaining higher education, but also thinking about, okay, how are you going to provide for your family, and like what ways are you going to give back to your community, was definitely something that I always heard in different ways from my family. And then just again working with different community-based projects, and thinking about, what are the ways that community capacity building can really contribute to the sustainability or the well-being, and thinking about, the way students can really get involved, I think is extremely important too.
What drew you specifically to watershed and land use planning, and why did it feel meaningful for you?
Hmm. So I knew when I was going to do a graduate program that I wanted it to involve my home community in some way. I knew I wanted to get involved with like tribal governance processes or practices. I knew I wanted to develop and gain certain research skills as well. And I knew it was going to have and incorporate like community-based principles. And so just figuring out what that would look like, it definitely took shape. And so Lonnie, that's when Dr. Lonnie Tsenonjeni was able to reach out to me and say, hey, like I'm doing, watershed research with my home community in Torreon. I heard that you've started, going out to Mexican Springs chapter and doing that kind of work. And so would you be interested in a research assistantship? Because I had already started connecting with my chapter community, with their planning committee. And then that's when I got connected with Dr. Tsinajani and her work. And so, it was really cool to be able to connect in two different chapters, the Eastern Agency and then where I'm from, the Fort Defiance Agency, and just seeing the ways that community identified goals were being articulated. And then I think just also within UNM, the opportunity for students to be able to engage in this work for sure was really impactful, and definitely learned a lot.
What was it like returning to Torreon and Mexican Springs in a professional role, not just as a visitor or a community member?
Hmm. It was definitely very nerve-wracking. I was super scared going back to my chapter community in this way. Um, and, it does require that vulnerability to be able to go into community. And so, um, yeah, I definitely remember thinking, okay, like, well, as soon as I'm attending this chapter meeting, like, there's no going back. You're going to be committed, and you're going to have to keep showing up. And so and then also on the other side of it with community, that willingness to be able to have those conversations. And, luckily they did invite me back and, kept telling me to attend different meetings. And so with Torreon, that was my first time going out to that area. And it was just really beautiful. I really have so much respect for that tri-chapter area of like Ojo, Encino, Torreon, and Counselor chapters, and just the level of organizing that has gone down. And, Dr. Tsinanjeni and her work, being able to go back and contribute with their research skills, their communication skills, and be able to really uplift the community in different ways. And so, going to Torreon for the first time, I got to see their library, and that was like a first for sure, to be able to see like a Navajo chapter library within the community. And that was a really big deal for me because we didn't really have anything like that where I grew up. And so I really loved being able to see that.
Can you share a moment out in the field, a meeting, a conversation, or anything that you would like to share that shifted how you understood this work?
Yeah, that definitely depends on which conversation, which community member, or even like professor, I was engaging with, especially if, I couldn't find certain information or data. I would lean on my mentors, my advisors, and community members to be able to, fill in those gaps. And so I think with Mexican Springs, some of their planning and development goals was to attain local government agency certification so they could have more direct oversight of planning and development projects going on in the community, programming services, stuff like that. And then with Torreon, those conversations in terms of development and planning was with Watershed research, and gaining environmental baseline data to be able to, have more assertion with, how water management goes down, how other water projects, might occur, or just like building a data repository for the community, on their terms. And so, you definitely had like these very different outcomes or like these different goals, but, it definitely had shared values. And so when speaking with community members and hearing them articulate that, it definitely expressed really deep connections to the land, really deep stories of their family and their histories, and how taking care of the land has always been incorporated in different ways. And so it was really it was really impactful to be able to gain that insight when speaking with them. And then working with Dr. Lani Sinajini and just learning from her and her experience so far of doing work in her home community and the ways that has shaped her and the way that she carries herself or the way that she wants to include students. Yeah, so being able to engage in those kind of conversations, that does again require that vulnerability and that willingness to, sometimes drop that ego when you don't know everything and be willing to answer and ask questions. I think it definitely is a good practice and skill to have.
Working directly with rural indigenous communities, what opened your eyes the most about their strengths and challenges in the planning process?
I think when you're able to go out to community and have those conversations, and you really get to learn all the different roles that community members, tribal leaders, that they all play, researchers, and so you really get to understand the different forms of commitment that has taken place within these spaces. And so just being able to see all the different hands that have contributed to what planning and development has, looked like within these communities. I definitely learned a lot of just the commitment to be able to say, this is where I come from, this is who I am, this is what I value, and, I want to be able to contribute to the sustainability of a community and what that looks like within my area. So I think in thinking about the ways youth and elders are a really big focus, especially between Torreon and Mexican Springs. There was a focus on being able to say, we want wellness programs here for our elders and our youth. We want to be able to provide certain services that can reach our more rural residents, and so I think just those strengths, it really just is constantly thinking about, the community as a whole and not really individualistic kind of mindset or even just, infrastructure development is definitely important, but that well-being aspect on, how does that look like within my community?
How did collaborating with Dr. Lani Sinajini and your student research team shape the way you approach your project?
Yeah, it definitely incorporated those CBPR, community-based participatory research framework principles in terms of reflexivity and, thinking about the having community involvement and that engagement and part of those decision-making processes, of like what would be our deliverables, especially when you have student researchers who, they may not be Indigenous or they may not be from the Southwest, so really gaining that local context and those understandings, especially when you're thinking about tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and respecting, you know, data protocols, having those ethics. And so I think it was really important during those strategic planning meetings to be able to be grounded on that as a team. And Dr. Lani Tsinajani, she definitely was really helpful in guiding us through that and having those conversations, And so I definitely respect the way that she was able to um, mentor each of us because we each had different roles, and she allowed us to be able to get creative on what we wanted to be able to contribute in terms of the research. And so definitely respected her approach to all that, and that was able to inform the ways I wanted to be able to, engage with my home community in Mexican Springs and then with Torreon as well, and sort of thinking about the information that I would include, as well as the questions that I wanted to ask different community members, and sort of thinking about that reflexivity process throughout the whole thing, and that accountability for sure.
You center Indigenous methodologies and relational accountability in your work. How did those values guide the choices you made on the ground?
I think it was definitely thinking about what would be realistic, what would be practical, especially when you're on an institutional time constraint. I have 2 years to graduate, ideally. And so you do have to think about, or in my case, I did think about what would be most practical, and thinking about that engagement and being intentional about it as well. And so I think the Indigenous methodology aspect of it, that was definitely a goal I had coming into the graduate program, was including the research skills I wanted to develop, but also wanting to really develop an Indigenous methodology research framework for myself, because it is going to be long-term commitment kind of work. And I really want to be able to keep working with my communities and be able to stay here within the Southwest and do this work. And so the methodology, and I do thank, Lonnie for allowing me to be able to explore that. And so she, was really good with allowing me to go back to Mexican Springs when I needed to, and attend those monthly meetings, and then going out to Torreon, and taking the time to meet with different people. And I think even exploring, some research symposiums around town and being able to get into the CBPR Summer Institute, and so she was allowing me to be able to, really define what that kind of process would fit for me. And so, yeah, that Indigenous methodology for sure has that capacity building component, as well as with like that accountability in terms of the relations that you have, and what does that look like in terms of the deliverables that we were going to produce.
And talking about accountability, when you think about community engagement, what does real engagement look like to you? And what does it take to build that trust and accountability with your communities?
Yeah, I think, right away I just think of it's an opportunity to be able to tap into the input of different perspectives and experiences, and so that can inform, your planning processes and practices. For me, I think I've been able to really be fortunate to see the deep, intentional ways community engagement has taken place. On one hand, with the UNM Community Engagement Center doing service learning opportunities for students, and so connecting with a lot of different community-based organizations here in Albuquerque, and being able to, expose students to organizing work here, in the area. And then I think with the Community and Regional Planning Department, being able to get involved with the student leadership team and get really connected with the faculty. And so being able to learn from them in the ways that they have maintained their connections with community, or the ways that they've been able to help, bring students in to be able to say the importance of being intentional, that it does definitely take time. Um, and I think being able to ask difficult questions and being able to engage in kind of those difficult conversations and have a willingness on both sides to be able to learn and grow together.
In your experience, what does decolonizing planning actually look like when you are doing it instead of just talking about it?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you're talking to. For me, I think it's been just having an understanding of the local context and being able to lean on the existing strengths of community. And so when we had these community identified goals that were articulated directly with community, being able to lean on those objectives and those understandings. And then I think being able to practice that reflexivity throughout the entire process is extremely important. So I had, this framework that on an individual level, I had specific outcomes or, specific responsibilities that I wanted to be able to maintain. And then also with my deliverables for the watershed and the land use planning, that definitely wanted to be focused on what the community goals and objectives were. And so it definitely took shape throughout the whole time. Definitely a lot of different conversations, a lot of hours on the road for sure. And, you definitely take that time to think about and reflect on the conversation you had that day, a meeting that you had, presentations, and thinking like, oh, I wish I could have done this differently, or I really enjoyed talking with that person, and maybe thinking about, okay, where can I look for more information based on today, or I forgot to do this, so I need to make sure, I incorporate that into the next meeting or something. So I think it's definitely just, a learning journey for sure.
What impact do you hope your work will have for Torreon, Mexican Springs, and the next groups who take these efforts forward?
Well, I hope I was able to contribute to a set of resources that others could build from. And so I think if other students that, Lonnie will bring on for more of the work, I hope that they're able to see what we were able to do and be able to get creative in their own ways and take, sort of that leadership role and be able to say, okay, yeah, this is how we can build from it, or maybe these are the people that we should also include in the future. So I think just being able to deepen those pathways for sure, in terms of research, in terms of community engagement, in terms of student opportunity. And I think in terms of just like individual learning and building on your own strengths, and being able to really, have those own internal goals of what you want to be able to achieve within a graduate program or undergrad program, PhD, and be able to, share that with others, I think is, be really great.
How has this project shaped your direction after graduation?
Mm. Well, I definitely have really appreciated the different mentors I've been able to gain from this experience. So I really do want to uplift the community and regional planning department and the faculty, and just the different classes I was able to engage in, and my student cohort members, those colleagues, just really incredible people. Like planners are great people, and so I definitely want to see it grow, and would love to be able to stay connected, and um, yeah, in terms of afterwards, I think it's just going back to the ways that I want to engage in the Indigenous research kind of planning and development at a very local scale. So what does that look like? And so investing in spaces and places where they have those kind of community-based principles, where they have those kind of self-determination goals for our tribal nations here. I think also really big focus too for student involvement. I've been fortunate that the spaces I've been in as a student, it's always been guided by really great mentors and leaders who provide that space for students. And, if students are willing to meet them, in terms of community engagement or Indigenous research methodologies, having that accountability is extremely important too. And so definitely, probably looking at a lot of different places in terms of, after graduation. But I think, yeah, being able to hone in on all the amazing work that is already happening. And it's not necessarily like urban planning, design. It is public health. It is, community-based projects. It is community development, infrastructure development, and so, yeah, I think Albuquerque and our tribal communities are doing a lot of that work already. And so just figuring out, where that is and what that might be.
What is different between the indigenous methodologies and traditional methodologies in research?
Mm. I would say the Indigenous methodologies, they definitely center those Indigenous perspectives, those worldviews, those values. So that does translate with, those traditional practices, those oral stories, the language for sure. And so being able to tap into, and I think it depends on who you're talking to in terms of community and what those specific projects or those research goals might look like. And so, yeah, I think with more of those mainstream research paradigms, definitely has been more extractive. And so it has definitely dispossessed, cultural identities, resources. And so countering that with Indigenous research methodology incorporates that decolonizing aspect and claiming, that, we get to define our knowledge and we get to define, what living well looks within our communities.
What message would you share with other students who want to work with their own communities or do community engaged research?
I would say just ask as many questions as you can, and you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone to be able to just maybe attend a meeting and really, do your own research and find out where, community are engaging with each other already, where certain projects may already be happening. And I think definitely taking advantage of that student title to be able to, go to conferences, to do different symposiums, to do presentations, like, really hone in on all the different resources that the institution has to offer, I think is extremely important. And so getting involved intentionally, and understanding that there will be a lot of lessons to be learned for sure, and to take that, seriously, especially when, if you have other community leaders or professors that are taking the time to meet with you, preparing the questions that you want to be able to ask, and also, if you're not sure, being vulnerable too, and say like, I don't know what this looks like, but I know I want to get involved. And so what are the different ways that you could either be supportive, or where you could guide me, where I could find more information, And so, yeah, I think that definitely does take practice as well. But I think just the willingness to be able to want to get involved in the first place is extremely valuable. I just really enjoyed my time within the Masters of Community and Regional Planning program. And so I hope to see it grow, and I'm really looking forward to what comes next for all of that as well. And so I just would like to thank my different student colleagues and the friends I've been able to make, and the connections I've made with the faculty, and for Dr. Lani Sinanjini and her work, and our student research team. They really invested a lot of time, and you can see the commitment to community as well. My name is Megan, and I'm originally from the Mexican Springs area, which is just north of Gallup.